Well, President Akufo-Addo there, and we're going to be discoursing on those members of parliament from both sides who have lost their slots in parliament. Don't you forget that some of them lost in their primaries, some of them have gone on voluntary retirement from parliament, and others contested on December 7 and couldn't make it through. Now, you've seen some images of those from the NPP side who have lost, prominent among them, the likes of Yawabena Samoa in Adenta, among many others, Dr. Kobwe in Lejokuku, and Dr. Derek Odro, I should say, not Dr. Derek Odro. All of these people, bigwigs within the party, George, and are losing their seats. But from the NDC side as well, let's take a look at what the picture really is. I mean, if you go to the Savannah region, Damongo, Adams Mutawakilu losing his seat. They lost in Mion. They lost in Salaga North. Let's take a sneak peek at what exactly the picture looks like when it comes to the NDC and its losses in Parliament. So we're going to actually do this with Dr. Rashid Draman, who will actually be joining us on the beat of Parliament and what exactly has happened. He's Executive Director for the Africa Center for Parliamentary Affairs. There's also Lois Eduamwa-Addo, Programs Manager with WILDAF, and she'll be talking to us about those 39 women who have made it into Parliament. Quite a feat there. And then Colonel Festus Abwaje, a security analyst. So all of them join us this morning. Ladies, gentlemen, I know you can hear me. A very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us on the AM show.
For the opportunity.
Hear from you. So just unmute if possible so we can hear your responses. A very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Great. So before we get into the conversation proper, maybe we can take a look now at some of those candidates who lost their slots from the NDC end. So starting there in the newly created Savannah region, Damongo, which is the capital, Adams Mutawakilu losing there, a bit of a shocker to many. Then in Lambwisi, there's Edward Derry, who also lost his seat. Yagaba Kubori, that's another one of a surprise, the NPP taking that one. Abdul Rauf Tanko, the losing candidate. When you go to Karaga, Swaliu Al-Hassan is there. He lost. And then Mion, another loss for the NDC, Mohammed Abdul Aziz. In Saboba, there's Charles Bintin, who also lost there in that race. There are many more of them that we'll be bringing you. So just keep your fingers crossed for that. And we'll be doing the assessment from both ends, NPP and NDC. Tolon was also a loss. Tatale Sanguli, Zabzugu, Al-Hassan Umar losing there. In Salaga North, Mumuni Al-Hassan losing. And in Binduri as well, Dr. Robert Kuganab Lem. You remember him, of course, and he has actually lost his seat. Muhammad Shaibu losing in Daboya, Mankarigu, I should say. So I believe there are a few more who also lost their seats. In Cherepone, Samuel Abdullahi Jana Nyete lost there. In Yunyu, there was Joseph Nabu, then Felicia Ajay lost in Kintampo South. When you go to Pru West, which the NDC was hoping to retain, Mohammed Masawood lost there. In Upper West Akim, Derek Dakon Ohene Asifo Bekwin lost that seat, and Mumuni Al-Hassan also losing in Salaga North. Well, let's start with Dr. Rashid Draman when it comes to how the chips have fallen in Parliament, the losses basically from the NPP side and the NDC side. Dr. Draman, now looking at the losses in Parliament so far, what would be your assessment of what exactly happened? Did you expect some of the losses that we've seen?
Yes. Good morning once again, and thank you for having me. I think the losses were expected. Even before we went to cast our vote on December 7th, I think we already lost about 60 MPs We had about 41 who lost their primaries from the MPP. And then we had about 11 who lost their primaries from the NDC. And then we had a number of retirees. So if you add all that, it gave you a figure of about 60 MPs who were not coming back to the 8th Parliament. And then on December 7, we lost about 50 MPs. I mean, you put 33 from the MPP and 17, according to my count, from the NDC. So that gives you, I think, a total of about 110 thereabouts in terms of the numbers. I mean, those who are not coming back to Parliament. And this is, in percentage terms, I think this gives us about maybe 40, 45%. If you look at it from maybe historically, we have averaged around that figure in Ghana. You put that within the African context. I think despite our losses, we still are doing quite creditably when it comes to the attrition rate. I witnessed elections last 2 weeks in Burkina Faso, where about 70% of the members were not coming back. Most recently in Botswana, we had the same, about 75% were not coming back. So for me, looking at all these, I'm coming to the conclusion that our members of parliament are slowly becoming endangered species, if I could put it that way. Their longevity in parliament is being threatened by many factors. We can go into those factors if time permits.
Okay. Now, just playing back what you said about, our members of parliament becoming endangered species and also that attrition rate you just spoke of. Is it good enough for us? There may be the dynamics in other countries like you've mentioned, but especially for the sake of continuity in Parliament. And that is also important because then these are legislators, they go through certain processes. I mean, there are people even in Parliament who have been there for a term already and still haven't really learnt the ropes properly. What does this mean, this turnover of parliamentarians every 4 years in our Parliament?
I think for us, I mean, within our context, we have to look at it particularly within the kind of constitutional arrangement that we have. We have a kind of marriage that has been induced by our constitution, a marriage between the parliament and the executive. And so if you take that arrangement in particular and look at the attrition rates that we have, it simply tells you that this is not good for the business of parliament. Because you get members of parliament coming in, and according to our constitutional arrangement, you are surely going to have a big number of them being appointed to become part of the executive. So right from day one, I think their attention becomes divided. And then you have the opposition, which is supposed to be holding on and ensuring that the government is held to account for its actions. But at the end of the day, as we have seen in the past, everything comes down to a vote, and then the minority would have its say, the majority, in most cases, always has its way. But what we are seeing in this current election and what's going to happen in the 8th Parliament is going to be a completely different kind of arrangement. Because as the figures are showing, we have a parliament that is divided right in the middle. And so what that means is, for me, if I look at the data, I look at what happened, I say we have what I call the 500,000 voter effect. So the NDC was able to gain the confidence of 500,000 floating voters, if you like, based on the data from the previous election. The MPP lost 500,000 floating voters based on the data from the last election. So what this tells us is that we are going to have in the 8th Parliament a situation where each party, for its own self-preservation, would have to, one way or the other, give and take and come to the middle and make sure that, look, we don't, for instance, look at NDC and think that perhaps maybe the reason why they suffered, I mean, the losses that they suffered and couldn't clinch power might be because people were thinking that they were simply excessively opposing would have been constructive. And then you come to the MPP, somebody would say, perhaps the reason why the MPP lost about 500,000 voters, floating voters, was because maybe the members didn't use the majority that they had in the interest of the people. They were excessively partisan and always towing the party line. So maybe these are questions that perhaps could be questions that would have created this 500,000 voter effect that I've just described. And so for that reason, what we are going to see is a situation where I think each of the parties would have to make sure that they come to the middle, they compromise.
Right.
You cannot always get what you want. I think there will be instances where the NDC would have to give, and there will be instances where the MPP would have to give. And at the end of the day, that would ensure that I think come 2024,
right.
Perhaps NDC would be able to convince the 500,000 floating voters that it couldn't.
Okay.
And maybe the NPP might be able to take back the 500,000 floating voters that it lost on December 7th.
Okay, I'll be coming back to you, Doc, on a number of matters related to some of what you just said. But let me also bring in Lois Eduamwa-Addo, Programs Manager with WILDAF. And Lois, I would like to start from here. 39 women making it to the 8th Parliament of the 4th Republic. Now, what were your expectations ahead of election 2020? And were your expectations met?
Okay, so thank you so much. And I will say that, yes, we were having high expectations because the 7th Parliament had 38 women. And with the, we always expecting more progress when it gets to women's participation in decision making, particularly in Parliament. So our expectation was to have more women. We had 126 women contesting from the various parties. So although we've made progress by one woman, it's still too low, our expectation. And so I would say that we had high expectations.
Right. Now, Lois, I just did the calculation, and that adds up to some 14.18% of women who are going to constitute, the next parliament. Not even 15%. Yes, you've got an extra member of parliament, but how much work really remains to be done? You go to other countries, Ethiopia, for example, and among others, and in some of them, there's a 50-50 balance in parliament. Just how much work do we need to do to increase these numbers?
Yeah, so over the years, we've always advocated for an affirmative action policy and law within the political parties and in Ghana to help balance the equation. Because if we wanted to go natural, like women failing in and then going through the election process as our male colleagues do, which everybody says that is the process, so everybody should be leveled with the same measure. We think that the press will be very slow, like we are having this year. Even in some previous years, we lost women compared to even gaining. We are even fortunate that we made a gain this year. So if we want to go by the standards, we weigh our male colleagues with the females. I think that the pace will not, we will not have a very rapid pace in terms of having more women in parliament. Other countries that you are citing as an example, they have made extra effort ensuring that women are represented in parliament by having certain seats just reserved for women. We have quotas. We also have political parties ensuring that they represent women well in their parties. It didn't just come as we see this. They made frantic efforts. But in Ghana, we've not seen so much commitment and effort in terms of ensuring that women are represented fairly on the decision-making table. So if we want to ensure that, then our suggestions we've always made to our government and political parties, which is the affirmative action policy and law within the political parties and in our country, we need to ensure that that comes to pass.
Now, Lois, with all these propositions you have made, they all sound very good, but in engaging the parties, what inroads have you made so far in this very regard? Because it appears that the numbers are still very low. Any light at the end of the tunnel? Do you see that?
Yeah, I would say that this year, the elections, we saw women taking up unique roles, which previous years we've not seen. We saw one of the main political parties filling a woman as a vice presidential candidate, which was very, critical in our politics, and this will urge other major parties to also replicate such moves. We also saw 3 women also contesting for presidential candidate. All these are little progresses we are making year, election after election, seeing women come to the limelight and taking up key roles. So these are all didn't just happen. It's been our continuous engagement with the political parties, easing the process for women to be able to also feature in the decision making.
Well, the feed for Lois a bit problematic there. I'll get back to her on that very beat because there are other pertinent questions that we need to delve into in that respect. But moving on, we shall also engage Colonel on some concerns in there with regard to security matters and some of the happenings on Election Day. Colonel Festus Abuaje. Now, Colonel, on the security front, basically, what would be your initial assessment of what we saw? We saw some scenes we didn't want to in Ododo-Diodio, Teshiman South, among other places. What would be your initial assessment of the 2020 polls?
Well, once again, thanks for having me. My own assessment is that given that we tout ourselves as being a beacon of democracy on the continent, we should have had a zero-incident-free elections. But we know that that wasn't the case. We came from the voter registration with at least 9 major violent incidents that resulted in the death of at least 2 persons and a few more injured, several items of property, different categories destroyed. The violence didn't stop after the voter registration. It continued into the voter exhibition. And sadly, it reared its head in the elections proper. Let's work with the police press release, where it said that there were a total of about 61 electoral and post-electoral incidents nationwide. That figure could be contested, but it's early days yet. We need to hear from other institutions like CODEO and ONEP, CDD, and so on and so forth. But of this 61, the police says that only 21 were true cases. Now, I don't understand what that true cases mean and whether the others 40 or so were fake. But of these true cases, 21 of them, 6 were fatal, and they resulted in the death of 5 lives and about 20 injuries. So between voter registration, post-voter registration, elections, post-elections, and I don't think the election process itself, the cycle is over, given that probably there are a few more constituencies that are supposed to be declared. We have lost in the region of 7 lives and more than 20 injured. And we need to ask ourselves, is this a democracy or is it not a democracy? That's one side. The other side is that look at the videos and evaluate the manner in which that force was used. I can say for a fact that there is no police or military academy or training center where crowd management or crowd control is managed in the manner that we saw at Techiman South. I want to believe. In fact, I cannot bring myself to accept that those who were engaged were professional police officers and not military officers. I think that in all likelihood, there were men dressed in those uniforms who do not belong to these institutions. Because the manner alone in which that fire was opened, sporadically, indiscriminately, I saw ricochets from the ground, meaning that they were firing right in front of the crowd. You know, several dropped on the ground. Initially, they said 3 were dead. Now we're told by the police that 2 were dead. So all was not peaceful. Granted that it was not widespread and the scale was not too large. It is a blot on the democracy of this country.
Right, Colonel, you know. but let me quickly...
Yes, please.
Let me quickly ask you, valid concerns you're making, and when I saw the videos from Techiman South, also very grave, especially listening to what some of the officials were saying in the background. But is it possible to have an incident-free election anywhere? Not even in the United States do we have that. I mean, so when you say incident-free elections, what exactly do you mean? Were you expecting that there would be nothing of this sort? Is that what you're implying?
What I mean is it acceptable in a democracy as we claim that on the 7th, Senya Breku East, if that is what it is, Kasua, that men should drive by in a tainted, SUV and open fire at a vehicle allegedly or supposedly having on board a candidate, a parliamentary candidate. Why do we need to go to that extent? That is Kasua. Now let's go back to Techiman South and ask ourselves, the way and manner in which we saw the security personnel lined up, and each one of them, I was eagerly waiting to see or hear what we call fire control orders. Managing a crowd requires that there must be a leader who is authorized to issue fire control orders. That fire control order must indicate the target and indicate the number of rounds. And invariably, it is 1 round, and it is to a non-vital area of the body. At least we saw that somebody had been shot close to the chest. So, we cannot say that because there were only 5 deaths. I mean, the 5 deaths were absolutely unnecessary. If the rest of the 32,000 plus or 33,000 plus voting centers could be peaceful, why were these isolated places not peaceful? The point I'm trying to suggest to you is that, in all likelihood, those who were involved in these incidents of fatalities were not professional policemen and professional soldiers. In all likelihood, there were others dressed in the uniform to look like them. And we cannot accept that in a democracy. Because let me tell you, this democracy is a fragile democracy. Indeed, I want to also argue that we don't need to compare ourselves with anybody, not least America, because probably we've done better than America under, relative or comparative circumstances. But I argue that when I left a certain studio on the 7th in the night, the only fatal incident that was recorded was the one at Kasua, which was a drive-by, although targeted. When you add Savelugu and you add Orododiodo, where at least there were 2 other incidents or separate incidents, you know, and then you add Techiman South, our democracy is not healthy. You know, there is still embedded in it the blatant resort to the use of force to settle political scores or to intimidate and to influence the outcome. But talking about the outcome, we need to also look at the impact of these incidents on the outcome, especially Techiman South, where you could hear clearly that somebody was ordering everybody to get out of the room. And I was asking myself, did that have to include the observers, the party observers? And if indeed it included the party observers and all of them left, could there be the likelihood that some foreign materials, pink sheets or whatever, could be smuggled into the collation center? If that was what it was, or whether it was, I don't think it was a polling station, that was a collation center. You see it? So the manner in which even the setup was organized, you know, EC officials, political party agents, other international, local observers, plus political party observers, you know, all of that leaves a lot to be desired. We need to do
hold it here for a while, Kano.
Yes.
Right. Let's leave it here for a while. I'll come to some other specifics with you, but let's reconnect with Dr. Draman. Now, with all that we've discoursed on, do you think it's going to be difficult for the Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo administration in Parliament in executing, you know, what we would expect a government to execute? Because now there's a lot that would have to go through Parliament, and should the majority be lost or should it be won by a very slim margin, just how difficult do you forecast it would be for this administration in executing the work of government?
You know, ordinarily, it will be difficult under, you know, ordinary circumstances, but we are dealing with exceptional circumstances here. As I indicated earlier, I think the outcome of December 7 is one that speaks to the fact that, you know, Ghanaians are not happy with a lot of things going on, I think, both within the executive and within Parliament. So, I mean, again, I'll go back to my point. Yes, the opposition would have to play its role. I mean, whichever party becomes opposition in Parliament would have to play its role of ensuring that they hold the government to account. But at the same time, this must be done in a constructive manner. It mustn't be just business as usual and just opposing because they have to play that role. And again, I mean, the party that would hold the reins of power would have to remember that, you know, just being excessively partisan and towing the party line, I think is not going to help their cause. So at the end of the day, given the extraordinary circumstances we are going to find ourselves in, it calls for a lot of compromise. It calls for a lot of give and take. Otherwise, I think we are going to see perhaps maybe a repeat of what we saw on December 7, and perhaps that might even be more brutal when we come to 2024.
Dr. Draman.
I think the point
okay, please go on with that point.
No, so the point I'm trying to make is that I think at the end of the day, on 7th January 2021, the NDC and the MPP would have to work together to make sure that they execute an agenda that is in the interest of the people of this country. Otherwise, anything short, I think, would incur the wrath of the citizens. And yes, maybe we might not have recourse, an immediate recourse, but I think the voter is very patient, and 4 years is not a long time enough. Right. And we'll have our say when the time comes.
Will that marriage of the two political parties in Parliament, you know, maybe a forced marriage all the same, but do you feel it will be possible, especially considering now that the NDC is disputing the outcome of the election. In fact, they are contesting on the presidential level. They are also contesting at the parliamentary level. Looking at the rancor right now, do you feel it will be possible, should the NDC have a majority in parliament, do you feel that marriage between the NPP and the NDC to ensure that the government business is executed, do you actually feel it is possible? And what will it take? What concessions will have to be made for that to happen?
Well, I think we are proceeding on the assumption that the legal processes will take their course, and then we'll run their course, and then we'll have some settlement in terms of the legal pronouncements of what the actual results of the 2020 elections are. And then on the basis of that, I believe that all the parties are going to come together one way or the other. And as I said again, it's going to take a lot of give and take. I mean, because this is a process that is going to be repeated in 4 years, in 8 years, and so on. And so each party would have to, believe, that this is an ongoing process, and you don't have to destroy your chances today because you are living to fight again another day. So and because of that, I believe that the two parties are going to find a way to work together. And then also in the 7th Parliament, I think the Right Honourable Speaker took an initiative to ensure that maybe for the first time we would have what is called the private members bill. So instead of all bills and the legislative agenda being set by the executive, we are going to see some of that agenda being set by Parliament. And that is going to be interesting to see how that plays out in the 8th Parliament. And just to conclude, I think if you look at, countries where oversight has worked, countries where, parliamentary business has been effective, there are countries where no one party has an overwhelming majority. Countries where there is always the need for a lot of compromise, there's always a need for a lot of give and take. And I think that is what we are going to see come January 7, 2021.
Now, focusing on some of those highly contentious areas, and I'm talking about places that it was not expected that either the NDC or the NPP would make gains. In the eastern region, some of those seats going to the NDC, some of them still being looked into. But in the Volta region, we have Hohoi, for example, going the way of the NPP, becoming blue for the first time, with John Peter Amewu taking that seat. Looking at the dynamics, would you say it points to the discerning nature, how our voter population or the electorate is getting discerning? And the NDC, for example, has already said that it is starting work to reclaim Hohoi. How easy or difficult would that be?
Well, I think that we all want to get to a point where we have a real democracy. I know that's an ideal that every country aspires to. But we want to get to a point where our elections are not influenced by where perhaps we come from. We want to get to a point where ethnicity and regionalism and so on do not influence our elections, so that people would vote on the basis of the issues that are at stake. People would vote on the basis of maybe what does this mean for my life, and what does this mean for my country, and what does it mean for my children. Sometimes we simply say it very easily that Ashanti region is a stronghold of the NPP. So if you put anybody there, whether it's a solid candidate or not, he or she is going to get voted. Volta region the same. You talk about NDC and so on and so forth. We want to move from that kind of arrangement where people would vote on the basis of the issues.
Well, technology, stepping in there. I would have wanted to find out from him whether we're actually getting there. But if he remains with us, we'll be able to check that bit out. Let's now get to Lois, whom I believe is still with us. Lois, if you still are with us, now, one other thing I would have wanted us to get into, even as we talk about upping the numbers of women in Parliament, would be this. Do you feel, apart from all that you've suggested, do you feel maybe we need to get the parties to stop fielding pairing two women in same constituencies? Is that a possibility? Is that something you've ever contemplated? Do we have Lois? Okay, so Lois, it appears you might be on mute, so you might have to unmute. If you can hear me, Lois. But the question I was posing was simply this, that we've spoken about other moves to get more women engagement in Parliament. I'm just trying to find out from you, would it be something you've ever contemplated, discoursing with the major political parties, maybe practically all the political parties, when it comes to agreeing to not field two women or multiple women in the same constituency to up the numbers, to improve the chances of women getting into Parliament? So Lois's feed is frozen, just like we had with Dr. Draman. Is Dr. Draman on now? Okay, so let's go back to Colonel Festus Aboagye. Now, I was about to situate the conversation properly on Ododo Diodio, where, in fact, the Member of Parliament, Nina de van der Pooij, was arrested over supposedly instigating a shooting incident. So Ododo Diodio itself being a hot spot right here in the Greater Accra region. What concerns do you have there in that specific regard with the allegations that were made, which, by the way, have not been proven? What concerns do you have there with the political actors and some of the chaos we saw on Election Day?
Well, to start with, as far as Ododo Diodio goes, I don't think it came as a surprise. And I want to actually explain that there were two separate incidents. I think there was one very early on, at the start, over the arrangements for the different ABC or 1, 2, 3, polling stations, which somehow was managed, and then the process started until much later on when the one involving firearms, happened. It could have been worse, but I want to believe that given that Ododo Diodio was rightly or correctly identified, mapped out by the police as a hotspot, the IGP might have arranged to assign a reasonable number of election security management personnel to bring the situation under control. I see, normally I believe in the cause and effect equation or discourse. If every one of us had gone to these polling stations and the collation centers and sworn that we're going to commit ourselves to uphold, the principles of democratic elections, there wouldn't be any reason for anybody to resort to other unnecessary measures. So we always need to find out, why do certain people behave the way they behave? If the stakes are high and somebody thinks that the ballot is going to be stolen, then of course that person will be agitated to try and take measures. And in trying to take measures to stop that stealing from taking place, you end up with these kinds of situations. To start with, maybe the Election Security Task Force should have been able to bring the situation under control. But as we know, in many instances or in some instances, that is not the case. So I wouldn't want to fault that MP too much, until we know the details of the case, because the police report is only 3 lines on what looks like an A4 or A5 paper. It's not enough. to actually look at the context of how that incident started evolving and what exactly the member of parliament said. You know, be it as it may, the situation was brought under control. I'm told that he was released. The counting went on, the collation proceeded, the results were certified, and I think we're all, we all know the outcome of the elections there. But earlier on, I was saying that we can have a zero incident election. It's absolutely possible. When we look at the serious cases of the violence, that is the question we need to ask. Why did they happen? And I want to suggest that they happened because those persons involved, were not necessarily thugs, but they were thugs who were standing on some powerful ground to think that they could take those measures, like Eutu Senya is that I mentioned, that one report said that they fled, they ran away. Now I have information that no, people were not interested in arresting them and enable them to escape. That is one. We necessarily need, even Savelugu, where an incident took place close to the house or at the house of the candidate of the NDC. And I'm told the boy or the houseboy or somebody was either killed or dead or something like that. Why do we need to do that? When we have created institutions like the police and other security services to ensure that elections are secure, why do we take the law into our own hands? We do so because the evidence shows that those who do that exploit the political base of power that they have, And I'm even wondering whether any of these incidents could lead to successful prosecutions. I doubt, because invariably, if they are political party members, especially belonging to the, let's say, the incumbent, they're going to be set free, and even if they happen, the police will not come back and tell us what the outcome is. So there is a lot that we need to do to consolidate and strengthen our democracy, the way and manner in which we're going about it. And let me probably end on this. Look, the use of force is not the end in itself. On democratic principles, one, those who open fire must go to court and give reasons why it was necessary for them. They need to justify in a court of law that it was necessary to open fire. They need to justify that shooting somebody in the upper part of the body was also lawful. They need to show that after the fire was used or opened, they took measures to help those who were injured. All of these must be cases or elements of the rule of law. The video that I saw, if I saw it and interpreted it correctly, those who were injured, those who were dead, were held by the public, not by the security personnel. And that is wrong. It is wrong. That is not what we teach. You see it. So in terms of the broad security framework, we still have a lot of work to do. And if indeed we need to consolidate this democracy, then it is incumbent upon us to ensure that our security architecture for elections, right, as I've emphasized, is the work to be done by the police. Right. And that the police will act professionally in accordance with the principles of democracy, respect for human rights, and the rule of law, for instance.
Colonel Festus Abwaje, now we seem to be creating some sort of culture where people mass up, regardless of the political party they support, at the Electoral Commission's offices. I mean, we saw it in Kumasi, we saw it here in Accra. How much of a concern is that, and what can we do from the end of the political parties to stem the tide of such developments? Only yesterday, we needed, water cannons and all of that to disperse crowds. What do we do?
What should we do? If the premise or the assumption in your question is that it is illegal, then we need to address that. My understanding is that it is everybody's political and civil right, to demonstrate peacefully. Now, if they choose to the ECHQ, that is fine. As long as they are peaceful, they don't undermine law and order, they cannot be stopped. They shouldn't be stopped, So the premise for the question probably is wrong. Now, let's remember that many years ago, there used to be a board at Independence Square. We can set up some of these points with large screens, in urban areas for people to gather and watch the results, unfolding. Now, talk about unfolding. Some concern has been expressed about how the EC delayed, especially the presidential results. That's the announcement of the presidential results. As in when they were certified, for instance, by constituencies, by the regions and so on. The EC could have put them out there. Now, when the EC waited and waited and waited, that caused a bit of apprehension and tension started mounting. Then you have these incidents allegedly to disrupt some of the procedures and then to have foreign material smuggled into collation centers and to have counts and recounts and counter recounts, I think in some cases 3, 4, probably 5. When these things start happening, you inflame passions. So if the EC is proactive and is sharing the results of or the outcomes of the elections as and when they come in, people will get a feel. Indeed, I suggested last night that coming to give one A4 sheet of the totals is not enough. Before that happened, the EC should have called the political parties and given them the spreadsheet, starting from polling stations, aggregated into constituencies, aggregated into regions. For everybody who is reasonable to look at the numbers, add them up, check with the pink sheets that were signed at the polling stations.
Okay.
Right now, there are a lot of discrepancies, that is being paraded around between EC figures and the certified results at the polling stations. You see, it doesn't help democracy. It's all about this question of transparency.
Right.
See, when it's opaque and people cannot see through, then they are, likely now to think that somebody is trying to steal their vote.
Okay.
And that accounts for probably the massing up.
Very quickly.
We saw, as you said, at different places.
Right. Very quickly to wrap up with you, and then I'll conclude with Lois as well. I'm going to give you 2 questions. I'm hoping we can address them very quickly. One, the NDC has refused to actually, accept the results of the elections, both on the presidential and the parliamentary levels. How much of a security concern is that, so to speak? And from the other angle as well, how would you rate the work of our security forces in election 2020? I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, how would you rank what, the performance was of our security services? So the NDC and its non-acceptance, is that a security concern? And the security forces, what they did in election 2020, how would you rank them?
I don't think it's a security concern. This is a rule of law issue. So if the NDC says that it rejects the results, and I suppose that it is going to proceed to go to court with evidence that it has, that is fine. We need to be clear that the minority leader in parliament who made that announcement did not say that they were going to use other measures, including force, to ensure that the situation is reversed. So my inclination will be that they're going to proceed from the statement of the rejection through the courts and have it resolved, which is consistent with CI 127 and indeed with the constitutional provisions. Now, come back to how the security forces performed. If we use the benchmark of the total number of polling stations, about 33,000, let's say, and then you minus the few isolated incidents, you can say that on a proportional or proportionate measure, the security forces did well in maintaining law and order and security of the electoral process. However, as I started, if you go back to the voter registration, where there were 9 major incidents, then you come back to post-voter registration, where it dropped from about 9 to about 6 or 7. Then you come to the elections, where it dropped to, let's use the police statistics, it dropped to 6. It means that our electoral process is still volatile. You see, it is characterized by the use of force resulting in fatalities. And I've said that between voter registration and the elections, we are looking at about 7 deaths and upward of 20 injuries, besides, if you like, the destruction of property. That is not acceptable. It shouldn't be acceptable. Indeed, we need to be aiming higher. And I'm waiting for Codeo and others to come out, because they have more resources to actually do the comparative analysis.
Right.
But I won't be mistaken that this 2020 election is the deadliest since 1992. That we've not had deaths in elections except this 2020, where we've had 5 of them. And that's not good enough.
Colonel Festus Aboagye, thank you very much for joining us for this discussion. He calls the 2020 elections the deadliest since 1992, owing to the deaths, the 5 deaths we've recorded. Lois, if you can hear me, I would take your final comments on the women participation in Parliament. I was asking a question earlier about whether it would be feasible to discourse with the political parties to not field all women contestants in the same constituency, so that the chances of women actually getting to Parliament would be improved. What is your take on that? Hello, Lois. If you can...
that one rather is the best. Hello?
Yes, I can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Okay, so I think that fielding all women in the same constituency is one of the best, because at the end of the day, whatever the outcome is, a woman will certainly emerge the winner. And in some countries that have had more women, they have really reserved seats where only women contest. So they know that at the end of the election, out of the 30 reserved seats, we know certainly 30 women are going to automatically be in Parliament. So if we want one of the way out, that is one of the, because when you field women and men, many of the time women are not able to make it to the end. I mean, successfully, looking at all the violence and the violence perpetrated against women, and the stress that go with campaigning for to win. So fielding all women makes it more easier, because you know that certainly a woman will emerge the winner.
My final question to you now, of those 39 women we're seeing going into Parliament, a number of them from the ruling NPP, the incumbent. How many of these what percentage would you like to see being given appointments as ministers, deputy ministers, and the rest? Do you have any projections in mind?
What the feminists and the women's rights environment always ask for is a minimum of 30%. Right. And many of their manifestos, they have also projected the MPP in 2016, which they said they are continuing with most of their provisions in is 30%, a minimum of 30% representation. The least we can ask for is a minimum of 30% representation in decision making in this government.
Well, I'd like to say a very big thank you to you, Lois Eduamwa-Addo, Programs Manager with WILDAF. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on the AM show. Of course, we're also joined by Dr. Rashid Draman, who is actually with the Africa Center for Parliamentary Affairs. And earlier, I was also interacting with Colonel Festus Aboagye, a security advisor. It's been quite a conversation, but of course, we still are in the aftermath of election 2020. And when we return from the break we're about to take, we'll be going into the regions to find out what exactly is happening there as we speak to our correspondents. Do stay with us on the AM show. We shall be right back.